Welcome to Signs of the Times. I'm Dr. Willard Regester, and again, we have with us the editor of Liberty Magazine, Lincoln Steed. He's going to talk to us about the affairs of Christians around the world. And it's time. There were many people that have said, why are you so quiet on this subject? And they know the people around this station on the western part of the United States realize that we are talking to a lot of people, almost 30 million, especially, we hope, not too long. Why are we silent on the way that Christians are being treated, not only in the world around, but in the United States? Today, Lincoln, I would like you to talk about maybe the Christian situation in overseas.
Well, you held up that recent issue. Is it the latest? I work so far ahead, I sometimes lose
I think it is.
which month that is. Global slaughter of Christians. But on the cover, there's that picture of that poor woman wailing with emotion at the loss of maybe more than one relative, because the coffins behind her are many. That was the bombing of a Christian church in Pakistan by Muslim extremists that killed, I think, 75 or so.
Yeah, it says a suicide attack, and a pair of suicide bombers blew themselves up outside of a 130-year-old church, killing at least 56 people.
Yeah, now that's incredible. That happens periodically, not just in Pakistan, throughout particularly the Muslim world. But right now, let me just tell you one thing in Pakistan that is concerning our church. We found out a little after the fact, but a Seventh-day Adventist layperson, a young man in his 20s, had romantic intentions toward a young woman that he met there and hoped to marry her. But in those traditional societies, often the family have more say than the principals. And so her family decided that she could do better elsewhere. So they married her off to a fellow living in England. This was bad for the young man and the woman. And foolishly, I think, they kept up some telephone conversation. Nothing wrong, but it was probably not helping either of them. But the husband heard about one of their conversations.
Her dad, the husband? Or?
The new husband of this woman that was married off in England. So he reported to the Pakistani authorities, not that his wife was talking inappropriately to another man. I mean, they didn't seem to say anything that was wrong. It just probably was ill-advised for them to talk. But he said that in these conversations, they were maligning Islam. Now, you know, in the United States, you can malign all sorts of religions and get away with it, even if you offend someone. But in Pakistan, it is a capital offense to insult the Prophet or Islam. So immediately, this young man in Pakistan was put on trial for his life. We heard about it just at the point that he was convicted. And the judges, as so often, show that they have a certain sympathy, because they called him guilty, but they chose to give him life imprisonment instead. And then that enabled him to appeal, and his appeal process may take 2 or 3 years, and we're hopeful that he'll get out on appeal. And in a way, he's safe now, because if he were declared innocent and released into the community, it's almost certain that the local imam would rant and rail against this profanation of the Prophet, and he would probably be killed by vigilantes. And this happens all the time. Right now, this is one of our Adventist members who we're trying to help with the defense, and it's horrific that just for being an Adventist and a slight indiscretion, you know, I'm told the whole story, but I wouldn't even put it in the realms of infidelity or anything. It was just a contact that he had with the woman he hoped to marry that escaped him. Yeah. But a jealous husband could say he insulted the Prophet, Islam. And even if he did, but there's no evidence that he did. But even if he did, it doesn't deserve death by no global tribunal or legal system other than that area that we know of.
Right.
And this is happening all the time. There was a case a few years ago where 2 brothers in Pakistan bought ice cream from a street vendor, and they wanted to eat out of the bowl. Typically, these guys have their own bowls, and he said, "No, you can't eat from it because you're Christians." and they objected, and so he immediately went and said that they maligned the Prophet, and they were put up for trial on their life, and both of them got 25 years. That's the hazard that a faith, in this case Christianity, can have in a country like that.
Now, you've been in Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
Now, what guidelines do you follow just to be safe? I mean, do you know everything that you ought to know before you go in there, or do you do you learn as you go along? Because do you know you shouldn't eat that ice cream out of that? I mean, that kind of thing.
We have to face the facts. Whether it's the United States or Pakistan or wherever, it's usually the lower socioeconomic level where people are most vulnerable. Like here in the United States, religious professionals can talk about stuff and even differ on religious points, but it's down in the local community at the school where someone's likely to get beat over the head with a bat if they think that they've got a wrong religious view, or It's not really something you and I would need to worry about just as a tourist, but you can certainly see the polarized religious situation. But it's not just Christians in Pakistan. Recently on my own TV program, I had an imam of the Ahmadiyya cult, a Pakistani leader. In fact, he leads, he's one of the top leaders for the Ahmadiyya community in North America. There are about 10,000 of them. And worldwide, there are about 8 or 10 million. But in Pakistan, they have been deprived of their citizenship. If they say the Muslim greeting, was it Salam Alaikum, something like that, it's pretty much the equivalent of good day, but it's an Islamic greeting, they're subject to 20 years imprisonment.
If they say, why?
Just to speak the Islamic
But what does he believe? I mean, what's his religion?
They're Muslims, but they're a Muslim sect that tried to bridge the gap between Christians and Muslims in a way that's not acceptable to us, but they claim that their founder in the mid-1880s was the incarnation of Jesus Christ, Muhammad, Buddha, and all the rest. He's the Mahdi. So it's a denial of Muhammad from the Muslims' point of view.
So that's Muslim after Muslim, really.
Oh, this happens all over the world. We need to understand that Islam is not a unified religion.
Okay.
It's more riven by sects than Christianity. And the two major factions are Shiite and Sunni, and their only real division is over the succession from Muhammad. But there are many, like Sufis, that are mystics. There are the Ahmadiyya, as I just said, that have a whole different prophetic understanding. And many of them are persecuted viciously.
Now, you had him on your TV programs. Where does he reside in the United States?
He lives in Chino, California, runs a mosque there. And actually they had me speak at their national convention where there are about 7,000 people. And I think I gave them as good an understanding as I could give on why it's important that religious liberty is for everybody, not just for Muslims. And of course they know that. They're persecuted within Islam.
I was going to say they probably agree with that,
yeah.
But the people in Pakistan don't agree with that.
And Pakistan is not the only place. It's come to the fore since 9/11 for reasons that our leaders could explain the best. We chose to ally ourselves with Pakistan, where the most radical foot soldiers of Islam are, and we also allied ourselves with Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni state, but they've struck a deal between the ruling family and the Wahhabists, or the most conservative, rigid form of Islam. And so, we tend to get a vision since 9/11 of really extreme Muslim states, but there are other places. But I think Pakistan, Islam explains part of Pakistan. The other part of it, that I'm a history major, and our listeners should know this. Pakistan is a product of the partition of India after the British Raj, or the British rule. They had a civil war, in essence, even though Gandhi didn't want it. They had a civil war, and the Muslim minority in India were forced east and west. And Pakistan is the western half of India that was divided off and formed a separate country. The western part of Pakistan is now known as Bangladesh. That's also Muslim, and then India proper is largely Hindu.
Right.
But since they've had these religious warfares, that's basically what it was, a religious civil war. Pakistan is really, its whole reason to be is a religious antagonism. So it's sort of sharpened their religious intolerance and fanaticism, even though the structure of the country, as founded by Jinnah, was their leader, a little bit like in another program I mentioned in Turkey. The leader there was Kemal Ataturk. It secularized the country. In Pakistan, Jinnah tried to secularize it, but he wasn't able to pull it off. So it's just a cauldron of religious antagonisms, hatred, and fanaticisms. And unfortunately, for our own use in the 70s, we fired them up to go fight the Soviets. Remember the Mujahideen in Afghanistan next door. We're not to blame. You know, it's not true. As an infamous friend of the president said, you know, the chickens have come home to roost. And so on. Yeah. But there's an element of cause and effect in history that with this incipient fanaticism, we did use it to our own purposes once, but now it's even getting worse, and sometimes we're on the receiving end.
Now, you gave us a story about Korea. I brought some articles on Korea and over there. You might just want to address some of these. You can turn them over.
Well, the persecution of Christians in Korea, as this heading says, is apparently getting worse. It's a closed society. We don't really know a lot of what's happening there, but North Korea is becoming even more paranoid. They've had a falling out with China, their longtime guarantor of political security. You know, you remember better than me the Korean War, but Americans have forgotten it. We entered that war to supposedly liberate Korea and to hold off communism.
You mentioned something that I need to tell you a short story. An aside, I landed on Utah Beach in World War II. That was in 44. And so I'm 89 years old now. But I came home.
I didn't know you were quite that old. You're doing well.
I came home. I had to do something. So I went to school, college, went to medical school. I had served my 3.5 years in World War II. When I graduated from Loma Linda, I had my draft card in my pocket for the Korean War. Now, you remember the Gulf of Tonkin and all the activities going down there? Well, that's what I was going down to. But fortunately, they solved the problem, but you bring it up, so
Well, the Korean War was really a carryover from World War II. It was unfinished business. Because remember, Japan had been fooling around in Korea. This was their backyard, their greater Asia co-prosperity sphere. And so we decided to get in there to stop the communist inroads. We fought the communists back to the Yalu River, and China entered the war.
Right.
And a man who otherwise might have been U.S. president, General MacArthur, decided that in fact, he was ready to drop the bomb on China. Yeah. He wanted to have full nuclear war, and he was removed. But in reality, we largely lost that war. We were forced all the way back, almost to the edge of the Korean peninsula. Then they, at great loss of life, and then we fought the Chinese back again to the Yalu River, pretty much, and then there was an armistice. Oh, yeah. It's never ended the war. This is very few people understand it. From North Korea's point of view, this is a never-ending war because it never was formally ended.
Right. Well, has it been ended with South Korea? I mean, what's going on there?
Well, no, South Korea live under the expectation of imminent invasion from North Korea.
Really?
And Seoul is only about 50 miles from the border, so it's always understood that if the North Koreans invade, that Seoul will probably fall very quickly. And we're getting a little off religious liberty per se, and I want to focus on it, but it's worth remembering that only, within the last administration, during the Bush administration, I remember they actually changed the rules of engagement in North Korea. They pulled their military back 50 miles, and the Secretary of Defense said that they would be now probing their defenses. So they basically attempted to trigger a confrontation. And there were riots in North Korea because they saw this as a resumption of the war. So
Who was probing, South or North?
No, the U.S.
Oh, really?
We were running patrols across the border, and we pulled the soldiers back because if you're close to the border, you'll be overrun. So they were back to cushion the blow and then to deal with it. So this is a hot area, but from the point of religion, they see the West as the oppressor, the frustrator of their nationalist ambitions, because just like Vietnam, I'm not pro-North Korea at all, but this is unfinished business of a single country. One way or another, they should be united. And our intervention has kept frozen a false division between one country. And so since the West, the US in particular, are pressuring North Korea to be a Christian in that country is not just to have a different religion. Their main religion is worship of the leader.
Right.
Their traditional religions are more likely Buddhist and Shinto and things like that. But to be a Christian is to basically be a traitor. You're a sympathizer of the absolute enemy. And so in a state that's paranoid, with some cause, and the more closed the system is, the more paranoid they become, it's a very, very dangerous environment for Christians.
Now, a lot of people ask this question, and it's a simplistic question, but I think it's a generic question, and I think, maybe I'm wrong, I've been wrong once before, why do these leaders fear Christianity? What is there about Christianity? I'm a Christian. I think I'm a good guy. I'm not going to damage anybody. I'm not going to attack my leader. And isn't that the attitude of Christians around the world? They're not going to attack their leaders, are they? What's the problem?
Well, particularly in a regime like North Korea, where they've created a cult of leader worship. Yes, it's a threat to that, to be a Christian, as it was in the early Christian church with the Roman Empire, where you were to worship the emperor. Here, your loyalties are not just divided. Your prime loyalty is to God, not to the emperor. So I don't think it's a mystery that they're seen as an enemy, and in some ways they are a threat to such autocratic rule.
Well, okay.
Not a threat of rebellion, but they pull away his authority. Just their very existence is a rebuke to that claim of being, in essence, God on earth.
But does that apply in the United States? Because we see more and more movement against Christianity here.
Well, you're getting. Let's have another program on that. That's okay. A very deep topic that needs to be discussed.
We'll have a program on that.
Yeah, but no, Christians around the world face difficult situations. The best defense anywhere, even in the United States, for a Christian, I think, is not to be political. Not in the sense that it's not our business to overturn or overly influence the government, but we should speak morally. We should have a moral voice. We shouldn't be silent about the principles of God's kingdom and of Christian behavior.
Isn't that what we're talking about today, a moral voice?
Right.
That we should treat Christians as Christians?
Right. And others. Remember, religious liberty is not just to protect Christians.
Exactly.
We should create an environment where everybody, Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, even Satanist, let's say, can follow their conscience. The individual Christian should witness to such people to give them the truth, obviously. But as far as the facilitating of religion or religious liberty, it should be universal. You can't decide ahead of time, yes, you can be a Christian, you can be a Muslim, but you can't be a Buddhist. Right. Then, in essence, then there is no religious liberty.
That's exactly right.
And the principle, I think, that you can easily glean from the Bible is God does not compel. Anytime you see a compelling of a particular religious viewpoint, it's not true religious liberty, and it doesn't come from God.
All right, so we are going to talk about that subject some other day. Now, we've talked a little about Korea. How about religious liberty? I think of China, and I think of the churches, the home churches. How are things going? I hear, and I read, that's how I hear, that they're not being molested too much in China.
Well,
I mean, from the authorities. Just
a few days ago, I was talking to a Seventh-day Adventist woman whose pretty much dedicated her life to working with the Chinese Christians, mostly Seventh-day Adventists, and she'd just come back from China. And she said that they recently raided one of the home churches that she dealt with, and she spoke to one of the people, and she said they told her that I think about 10 or 20 of them were arrested. This person escaped by diving out the back window, so they fled for their life. So there are crackdowns periodically. China's an interesting situation. Under hardcore Maoist communism, of course, Christianity had no place. Mao was down on everything. The Cultural Revolution purged the country of intelligentsia, anybody that opposed his rather bizarre vision of a greater China. Even leaders like Deng, the long-time leader of China, he was forced to go through the streets with a dunce cap on. So nobody was safe. But in the modern version of Chinese communism, which is really closer to a sort of a demand economy with capitalist overtones, it's not really classical communism anymore, but it's a very authoritarian state. In some ways, I don't claim to understand all of Asia, but I've studied it in school, so I know that the patterns of thinking in that part of the world. They are not, by culture, thought to think as an individual. You think of the greater community before your own self-will and so on. So that's sort of writ large on the policies of communist China now, and so they don't want anything that troubles the state vision. And consequently, when they saw the Falun Gong movement growing, which started off as just people in the public park doing exercises that had their origins in Buddhism, if anything else, but it wasn't really religion, but it looked sort of like religion to the authorities, and they started persecuting it. And I'm sure many of our listeners or viewers have read over the years different stories about Falun Gong members that have been jailed, that have been beaten to death in jail, regularly harassed and treated like public enemies. And yet they're not obviously either a religion or a political party, but they didn't fit the national view of where they're going, and they saw it as a potential opposition to government authority. Well, Christianity is the same. It's not their traditional religious beliefs. It's not Confucianism, which predated communism. It's a Western-style religion. It also doesn't have a great reverence for communism or the state, so they see it as inherently dangerous. And their approach in the modern era, or the post-Mao era, as to being to organize it. And so in China, the government is control of church operations, and they have the three self movement. And I can't remember the self things. It's self-rule and self-something else. It's the three self movement. And under that umbrella, run out of the government, they organize church worship. The Catholics, the different Protestant groups, they all have their church. They have their legal ministers. They have the times of worship. And a government minister controls all of that.
Everything. So this woman you talked to, from her standpoint, is the church growing?
Yes, it's growing, but it's a combination, and this is the point. As far as the government's concerned, it's the three self movement, and we operate within that, but you need to be careful because it's very controlling. And the Roman Catholic Church had an issue within the last decade. They would not allow the government through the three self movement to choose the local bishops. Now, other churches do allow the government to, in essence, choose the leaders. Even if they're put up by the membership, the government has to endorse them and authorize them. Catholic Church wouldn't allow that, so they had a huge running war with the Chinese government and the Three Self movement. But the Three Self movement is only a part of religious activity in China, but that's the legal part.
But regardless, as you say...
Then in the homes, many Christians, many Seventh-day Adventists meet regularly in home churches. And if they're caught, they'll be fined, they'll be imprisoned, they'll be in different ways brutalized by the local authorities because they're seen as not just a dangerous religion, they're seen as against society. They're against the common good, which is a term you'll hear a lot more in these discussions. The common good is a dangerous sort of a statement.
Right.
It means that if the majority wants something and you're out of the majoritarian view, you're seen as a threat to society.
The common good. Yeah, I've heard that, of course.
Coming up more and more.
Even
Here.
more in the United States.
Yeah.
So, and we're going to talk about that.
So our church is a combination. We are part of the Three Self movement, for better or worse. But as well as that, we know that there are huge numbers, may even be millions of Adventists and other Christians that meet in homes informally. And on one level, when you think of the government, you would expect them to be opposing it. Because even in this country, if you hold regular church meetings in a home, you will run foul of laws. There are any number of local ordinances about meetings over a certain size that can meet in private homes. You will be fined. We've even had articles in Liberty. I'm not saying it's right, but incorrectly applied by a government that doesn't like your activity, it can be used to drive you out of existence. Right. And China is doing that. They've created a legal structure where they control the religions, and then if you do anything outside of it, these same types of laws that we have against large groups of people meeting without parking lots and permission and so on, they will treat them as criminals.
Yeah, I don't know about you, you're into this day by day, but San Diego, they've just had a recent problem down there.
It pops up all the time in the U.S.
Yeah, that troubles me. But
well, you know, you don't want people thumbing their nose at normal community activities and that. And you can't, just like you could have someone with 10 cars in their front yard rotting and rusting because they don't care about local ordinances. You could have a strange chanting group of that believe in self-flagellation and chicken sacrifices meeting in the hundreds next door to you. Well, you wouldn't want that. So there's some reasonable cause to have ordinances that would restrict that.
We need to.
But when you have a faith that is seen negatively by society and these laws are applied against you, then you have persecution.
I'll just have a word of prayer. Our dear Father in heaven, we thank you for the various information that we have received today on this program, and we pray, dear Father, that you'll guide and direct your people around the world, the Christians we're talking about, even those that are harming them. We pray for them too. Dear Father, they're all children of yours. Guide them and bring them day by day to a knowledge of the Creator of the universe, we ask in Christ's name. Amen.